say you got a president, then you got the people that write speeches for him. Like, say the person that writes speeches for you, all the techniques and everything, to make it more like, make it more successful, make the speech more successful. Who would you say is most clever out of the president? I'm not saying the president, just like the president or the person that writes speeches, but yeah, who's powerful?
Well, it's a combination, because you can have a skill to write the best speech in the world, but the skill of oratory, the skill of delivering that speech is also a skill in its own right. So obviously most big politicians don't write their own speeches. But I would say it's a different type of power, because one person may lacks, okay, the guy who writes all Michael Jackson's songs is an English guy actually. I don't know if many people know, he's from London. A guy called Rod Temperton, yeah. Now, who's more powerful, Michael Jackson or Rod Temperton? Rod Temperton is not more powerful than Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is probably one of, if not the most powerful person of the 20th century because of his popularity. But Rod Temperton wrote most of his songs, and so did Quincy Jones. So I think that doing the work is power, and the knowledge is power, but it still takes a person that understands it and understands how to convey that and to convince people. And that person really is the person that carries the power. That's why artists have so much power. Many of them don't write their own songs, but they still have a tremendous power because it's them delivering the words and the message to you. That's just my opinion.
As a youth worker, I find that a lot of young people display challenging behaviour through lack of identity. How would you go about instilling identity in young people?
I think it starts really young. In my personal experience, I was really lucky. I mean, I ticked a lot of the bad boxes, should we say, single parent, working class, blah blah blah, this, that and the third. But I went to African Saturday School as a kid. So from 5 years old, I had this alternative source of knowledge, particularly as I think for people of African Caribbean descent. I mean, we can see that in what's going on in the streets. Yes, there's problems amongst all types of young people, but even among African Caribbeans, you can see a disparity between Caribbeans and Africans directly from Africa, even though genetically we're dealing with the same people. So obviously there's something this group is dealing with that isn't affecting this group as much. And I notice it even with children, first generation African children whose parents directly came from Africa, let's say. I judged a speak out competition not so long ago in Lambeth, and Lambeth is a very mixed borough. It's probably equally African as it is African Caribbean, yet all of the kids speaking in the final were African. Not only were they were African with parents directly from Africa. So they weren't second, third generation. Their mum was fresh from Nigeria or Ghana or Sierra Leone or wherever else. And I think that was very telling for me, because obviously they must have a much stronger connection to their identity. So I would say it starts really, really young for young people, embracing knowledge, embracing culture, understanding who they are and where they come from. And there's different groups of people we can look at in England that are fantastic examples of that. In terms of immigrant groups, if you look at Chinese people, for example, a lot of the problems that other ethnic groups suffer with, Chinese people as a whole group, not saying individual Chinese people, but as a group, don't suffer in the same way. You go to Chinatown, you know, economically productive, signs in their own language, you just have to go there and show respect. If you go to Southall in London, you look at the Asian community down in Southall, same thing, you know, you've got signs in Punjabi, in England. And so that strong sense of identity translates directly into how those cultures produce in British society. So the richest man in Britain is Indian. You know, 10 or 12 of the top 50 richest people in Britain are Indian. And that is directly related to the Indian community's sense of identity, culture, language being so well preserved. The perfect metaphor is probably Stonebridge Estate. If you go to Stonebridge Estate in London, which is one of the most notorious estates in London, on the edge of Stonebridge Estate is a Hindu temple. You know, and it's one of the most huge, impressive structures to that culture outside of that side of the world. And I really think that's a fitting metaphor for what happens when you hold on to your culture and understand it, and how productive that makes you in society, and what happens when you don't. Really hip-hop Shakespeare is music and poetry, so we do a lot of workshops with young people. We're working at the moment on some big performances to come next year. Artistic excellence, I think there's no better way to impress people than to put on a great show, ultimately, and if people can see the product and the point, because young people often say to me, well, what's the point? What's the point in reading? And if you can't show them what the point is, if you can't show them that they can create a career or an opportunity or a life chance, then it's pointless. So it's also in the actions, in what we do, where we go, with the people we work with, and what we achieve, hopefully, sends out that message. I don't know. I couldn't comment on an individual person's journey. I don't really know. I don't have an opinion on that.
Couple of ideas today, 5 and 7. At what age do you think is the appropriate age to start teaching children the actually going on in the world, but we're leading to the kids a bit faster than
Again, I can't answer that one for you. What I can share with you is what happened to me. And I don't know if it was the most sensible thing, but I know it shaped who I am. At about 5 years old, my mum made me watch a film, the Nelson Mandela film. I don't know if many people in here have seen it. I think is it Danny Glover who plays Nelson Mandela? It was a long, long time ago I watched it. But it's got some really graphic scenes in it of the Sharpeville massacre, etc., etc. And I was about 5 years old when I watched that. And I remember at that point thinking, people are not very kind. And it really it hit me. I really knew, probably better than I do now, just what that kind of meant. But I don't know if I'd advise that, if I'm honest. Because you don't want everyone to be a moany old sad git like me. Nah. It's really your call as a parent. I think it's how you break in that knowledge. It's letting them be kids, but at the same time, especially I'm seeing it now with my little brother and my nephew and people like that. Once they start approaching secondary school, whether you tell them or not, they're going to find out. And it's hard times, but it's just finding a way to break that in gently, I suppose.
You was reading really
Yeah.
books at a very young age.
Yeah.
What would you advise them to do as kids to read?
Definitely with that, I think I get a bit irritated when I go to schools and kids are being told, you know, read kids' books. Personally, I think that's fine, and they should, yes, read kids' books, but read adults' books as well. I think it's a bit condescending to be like, well, you're a kid, so stay at this level, and trying to keep everyone in a little box. Sometimes kids are exceptionally intelligent, and even if they're not, why should they not be pushed? You know, give them the Guardian and tell them to try and read it. Why not? You know, I think that no one tells kids in Eton what they can and can't do. That I do know, because I've got friends who went to Eton. They get told from the day they enter, you are the best, you're going to run this country, you're fantastic, you can do whatever you want. And I know that. So if your kid's being told, you know, read books for 7-year-olds because they're 7, don't make them read books for 7-year-olds. Make them read what you read. And even if it's hard for them, that's what I would say. And I just think we shouldn't limit ourselves. If it's difficult, surely that's a good thing. So how many have we got time for? 2 more? 2 more.
Just a question like yourself, with all the kind of qualifications you have.
I have what qualifications?
Why
I got GCSEs, that was it.
Why the route of a rapper than any other kind of career?
Well, I kind of do multiple. I do other things outside of rap music that I don't kind of advertise so much.
Your kind of businesses, the way you
Yeah.
do stuff, why the rappers?
Just something that always attracted me. I never saw hip hop through the lens of the negative press and the media. I always very much saw hip hop as the role of an orator in society, as the role of an oral tradition, as an oral poet. I never saw it as old gangster rapper. You got a mic and you know you wear jeans, so you must be a bad guy. And so growing up, I never had that kind of stigma. You know, I looked up to Chuck D and KRS-One and people like that. And so to me, it always seemed like a fantastic thing to do. It seemed like, to me, a rapper is a historian. You know, a good rapper is a historian. And if you look at particularly African oral tradition, you look at people like the griots, Google griot when you go home, you'll know that the idea that rap was invented in 1970, the idea that rhythmically rhyming over the beat of a drum was invented in 1972 in New York, is probably the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. People have been rapping over the beat of a drum for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so I see it very much in that vein, as someone in charge of recording the history of people, just doing it in a way that's fun. So for me, I see it as being a professor. You're just with a mic, hopefully, a little bit. I think this is, alright. 3 more and then we really got to call it that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry, last 4, and I'll make these quick.
Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up.
Originally as a kid I wanted to be an architect, and a teacher, my year 4 teacher crushed that. It was quite a traumatic incident. I drew a picture of a snowman, and I thought it was amazing. I've told many people this story. I thought the picture of the snowman was incredible. She completely disagreed. She didn't like me very much anyway, if I'm honest. And so she tore up my picture of my snowman and told me it was rubbish. No, this is the truth. And she made me redraw the snowman, right? And I redrew the snowman, and she told me it was rubbish again. She tore it up again. And for like 2 days this continued while everyone else had moved on to other work. From that day on I decided I was crap at drawing, and I was never going to draw again. So my dream of being an architect was like, I'm not going to do that. And that's how much power I think adults have. I didn't tell my mum, because I assumed it was my fault. You know, my drawing must have been crap. But then I got older and decided I wanted to do other stuff. But I think things like that do happen.